righty. My fellow old rollers, welcome to the Old Rollers podcast. Third degree black belt. It's Karel Pravec, correct? Or Karel? How do you pronounce it?
Correct. Karel.
Karel Pravec, better known as the Silver Fox. That's what I was calling him, just Fox for short, because I don't type real well. Very glad to have you, sir. It's just a super thrill.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, like to get started, because some people, not me, but some people might not be as familiar with you. Give us a quick introduction. Who are you? Where you're from? And a little bit of your background, how you came to Jiu-Jitsu or grappling in general.
Now, before I do that, can I ask you a question? What's the likelihood you're going to change the podcast from old rollers to middle-aged rollers?
The joke is that everyone, regardless of age, is actually an old roller because ain't none of us getting a day younger. So if you're 18, you're just an old roller in training.
All right, that's the mindset matter. So anyways, so back to your question. I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. First, I got exposed to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back in 1991 when, a lot of the Gracies and then included Hoyler, Hickson, Helio, Hoyce, and a whole bunch. It was like 20 members of the family did a seminar in Parsippany, New Jersey, on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And at that time, back in those days, a lot of seminars were like a weekend-long events. They were, you start at 9 o'clock in the morning, go to 12:30, have lunch for an hour, and then start again 1:30 till 4:30. So it was a weekend-long event. And a friend of mine, I was training Taekwondo back then, but we're incorporating a lot of other arts into our arsenal. And, I was training with a bunch of my friends. We went to Jeet Kune Do seminars, Muay Thai, and all the other things, trying to incorporate whatever we thought was sort of a good fit into our arsenal. And a buddy of mine gave me the Gracies in Action VHS. He said, check it out. They're coming to New Jersey. I said, all right, let's go. So that's where I went. Then a year later, in 92, there was another seminar. This was in New York. It was much smaller than the first one. And then in 93, I started to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in, as a supplement. At the time, I was primarily interested in stand-up. But I was like, you know what? I need to know a little bit if I have to go to the ground. Little did I know that ultimately that would become my main calling. And that's where I want ultimately, in 93, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And at the time, it was the first American black belt. Craig Kuko opened a school in New Jersey. It was about an hour from me, so I used to commute. But back then, basically, people would train once or twice a week. And, Craig had a falling out. Horian sent him out. He had a falling out. And, he partnered up with Henzo to make tapes. Henzo started to travel into U.S. to make tapes, probably 94, teach some classes and go back to Brazil. And I believe either 94, 95, he wound up moving back to New Jersey and New York permanently, and I've been with him ever since. And initially, my training was more kind of geared towards just getting, I would just want to know a few things on the ground. And I used to train 6 days a week, stand up, and 1 day a week, grappling. And then it was 2 days a week grappling, 5 days stand up. And then it was 3 days a week. And now I do 7 days a week, primarily grappling. So that's my background. I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ever since. About 14 years ago, I opened my school after, in New Jersey. And about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I made it full-time endeavor. I was in corporate finance, so kind of an interesting switch, but I was kind of doing that, and I was training every single day, but something had to give, and basically I decided to pursue Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and here I am.
Now, to kind of dovetail a little bit on my history specific to you, when I very first started, I'm a purple belt now. I've been training almost 5 years. But
Nice.
when I very first started, I went to a school for my work, and another guy there was from New Jersey, and he was one
Okay.
of your students
Oh,
at the
really?
time. Yeah, he was a blue belt. Super nice guy. I'm not going to mention his name just because I don't know if he would want to hear it, but we'll say after the show and talk about it.
Okay,
But
cool. Yeah, that's
just
awesome.
just a great guy, and he was like, yeah, this guy Karel Pravec, he's just like, he's some sort of wizard, man. And and I was like, that's really cool. So I just kind of started, I think I was following you maybe on Facebook and Instagram, and then it was either just before that or very soon thereafter came the Fluid BJJ book, and then the companion videos. I got them on Jujitsu, so there may be other
Oh, nice.
services now.
I appreciate
uh,
that. Thank you.
Oh, well, what I was going to say is that it had a huge influence on me, and a big part of why, like, this whole endeavor, this podcast is basically just a selfish, it's an exploration of trying to find ways to be, to roll dangerously into, somewhat of my older age. I'm turning 40 in a
You're
month.
a young pup.
Yeah,
I
no,
stopped counting. I stopped counting. That's the
so
way. That's the secret, guys. Stop counting.
just don't count, just forget it.
No,
Uh,
it doesn't matter. It's all in here.
but kind of going back to you, like the fluid BJJ mentality of don't fight for what my opponent won't give me, but take what they will and make them pay for it, is something that really, really has made a big difference in my whole training. Like, it's been, even at times when I'm not using moves directly out of the Fluid BJJ book, which I use a ton of them, I still hold on to that philosophy of, like, I could wrestle this guy for this thing and I might get it, but while he's fighting hard to not give me this thing, he's giving me this other thing. So why don't I just take that?
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to get from you the origins of that thought process, because to me there's elegance in that. Like, that's a worthwhile endeavor, just to see, how did you come to it?
It's a very interesting thing because I'm not talented. I'm far from it. Everything is, that I've achieved in jiu-jitsu and everything, my game, I do, my game is good, but I always want it to be better. But I had a very hard early 5-7 years. There were guys that were better than me back then. They were more athletic, more talented, and they still train. But back then they, even though I started before them, they surpassed me. But I've surpassed them now the last 5-10 years, even though they're younger and they still train. And I believe I credit that philosophy for it. For me, I think the reason I wrote the book, and the book is being kind, because I don't like to write. I don't think I'm well spoken. I don't like to write, and so it's got a lot of pictures.
Well,
So
I'm going to disagree with you. I think you're very well spoken.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But I don't. So I made the book loaded with pictures to illustrate the point that I'm trying to get across. Because pictures speak 1,000 words. But the reason I did it, people have been telling me, "Hey, Fox, you should write a book. Fox, you should write a book." I said, "Yeah, I'll think about it. And then, something snapped in me. I love dogs. My dog was kind of getting old, and I was walking him in the woods, and I would just think about this stuff. And the reason I decided to do it, I was like, I got tired of guys that are, posting on Facebook or forums or whatever else. I'm not Instagram. School is, and somebody else manages it for me. Guys that are turning 30, like saying, guys, I love jiu-jitsu, but I may have to quit because their body's broken down. And in my eyes, kind of like, I'll be like, have you ever thought about the fact that maybe you're not training the smartest way you could possibly be? You're just a meathead that keeps running into a wall. until you break that wall with your head. Have you ever thought about possibly going around the wall to the right, to the left, crawling over the wall, or digging under the wall? And guess what? If that wall, or somebody standing behind that wall is like trying to stop you from coming through, they have to run right, they have to run left. And at some point that middle is undefended, and that's where you go through. So that was my motivation. I just got tired of seeing this stuff. I was like, guys, maybe you're just not training properly. And I believe that if you train smarter and if you fight smarter, that you have better longevity, but it's also more fun. The better you become at it, the more fun it becomes, because it truly becomes a human chess. Anytime I attack, and that's the idea behind Fluid BJJ. I mean, there's two things. A play on words, because I do like training in the water. I'll come back to that, how I started, because I always loved water, but how I started. And, and changing the game. My game is very fluid. If you watch my game, I transition from one thing to another very smoothly. May not be faster than that guy, but my transitions are smoother, and I will nail guys that are possibly, purely if you just measured speed, faster than I am. So again, I think this is the way to do it. I'm like, listen, this may not be for everybody. If you're 27 years old, you're jacked to the gills, and you want to play power game, have at it. You're 230 pounds, have at it. But I think this philosophy appeals to a lot of people, and I think that's the way to go. And it's not easy to implement, but it's a very simple philosophy. When I attack with the intention to get that very first submission.
Right.
But a lot of times, if you attack technically and good timing, that guy has to defend it, and he typically defends in such a way that just like, okay, he rips out and he's giving you something like, you might be going for an arm lock on this side, and he's just driving in, he's giving you a triangle, and people get their blinders on. They're aiming. I decided to go for an arm lock, and I'm going to, oh crap, he's past my guard. You missed the triangle. Why wouldn't you go for that? So that's sort of the inspiration behind the book and the video series. I'm going to make another instructional series. I've been approached by BJJ fanatics to do it, but I told them that I want to finish. I've committed to doing the daily roll with the Fox, the daily online training, troubleshooting class, instructional, whatever you want to call it. I do it on a daily basis. I've committed. If I don't break, I'm doing it every single day until this thing gets under control. Then we're going to go back to, we were doing it on a monthly basis. We literally have a global audience. The only continent we're not covering is Antarctica, although there's a guy, Luca, from Serbia, who's volunteered to move to Antarctica and start to indoctrinate the penguins into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So we cover all the 7 continents of the world.
Well, I've been told that I wrestle somewhat like an epileptic penguin, so you may already have it covered.
So maybe Luca can convince you to go with him.
Yeah, Kentucky is basically Antarctica.
So, long story short, I just want to come back to how did I start training in the water. So the Fluid BJJ is sort of how I approach my game, my attacks. And I also do like training in the water. I train in the water 2-3 times a week because I've had a bad back problem since I was a kid. So if I were to train hard 3 days a week, I probably need either take a couple of days off, or I need a couple of soft days. So training in the water is soft days. It alleviates the pressure on my lower spine, allows me to work on my muscle memory, which ultimately that's what martial arts are about. But when I started, when I was in corporate finance, I used to train every single day. I train more than an hour a day, but back then I used to train only an hour a day. And I didn't have training partners. Just, when I travel, like for business, I would, stay in a hotel. If it didn't have a pool, I would move furniture around. I'd throw 1,000 kicks before I'd go to the meetings. So I started when I was working for this large global Japanese bank in the city, I started basically going into the pool before work and just primarily striking, which, by the way, striking is easier in the water. I'm amazed that more strikers don't do it. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it takes a little bit of getting used to. It's a little bit more, a little bit different. It takes some time, but to me, I think if it wasn't for that, I'd be broken right now.
So you're using the water both as a recovery tool, but also you're sharpening the knife with it. You're
Yes.
not just out there floating around and putzing around and, just
Absolutely.
being like, oh, I'm doing Tai Chi in the water or something. Yeah. You're using it as a means of getting better. Yes. When you're back on the mat.
Exactly.
And that's something I took from you. I travel for work as well. And there's a lot of times where I may not have access to a gym to go, take a jiu-jitsu class, but most of the time there's a pool. And if there's not, I can find a gym with a pool or something. Like there's a way around it.
It's usually easy to find a hotel with a pool.
Yeah. And so what I've done is, on those days where it's going to be a pool day, I just have something that I'm planning on working on, and my pool drilling will be just like the Fox. It's like, okay, I'm working on my guillotines, or I find, especially for me, my knees don't like taking a whole bunch of wrestling shots on the mat. Like they start to get cranky, but I can practice my shots in the water, and man, it really smooths them out, and slow is smooth and smooth is fast, so to speak. That's kind of where it came from, like what I felt.
It's absolutely true, and the water resistance makes you fast. Like sometimes there's days when if I train hard for too many 5 days in a row, I may need, instead of 2 or 3 days, I train when I get back on the mats, my game is very fast and, pardon the pun, fluid. Smooth. Now, let me ask you a question. I know you're doing the interview, but let me ask you a question. When you train in the water, once you relax, once you get the hang of it, do you ever drill and move and then you realize you were not doing it as well as you could have been, and now that realization makes you do it better and more technically?
I'm not certain I've come to that. I may not have gotten good enough at it. Like I may still be in a place. But what I have found is that I try really hard to, whatever it is that I'm drilling, I'm not just doing a physical motion. I'm also visualizing this in real time. And so
is very important.
My acuity for when an opportunity exists has grown a lot because of that fluid BJJ drilling style.
That's awesome. I'm happy. You made my day today. So,
dude, man, like I said, this is a selfish endeavor. I'm calling to get better, and you've already made me better. So I know, like, if I talk to that guy, I'm gonna run a good chance of getting a little bit better, from that conversation.
That's good to hear.
So when we talk about, the style, you came from striking. Did you pick up water drilling from striking, or was this something that you were like, well, I got a pool, let's work here? Was there an origin?
Well, at the time I literally started water training, probably it's probably 25 years ago, when I was just starting to do jiu-jitsu, when I was still maybe training jiu-jitsu once, twice, or possibly 3 times a week. So striking at that time was my primary focus. So when I was training in the water, I started with striking because it makes more sense. It seems to be an easier thing to play around with. And then, as I was doing it for a few years, I started to say, you know what, can I do some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu move? And then I realized that I had a buoyancy issue. Sometimes, when you go underwater, you take a deep breath and then you kind of float on the surface. You kind of just float. You're too buoyant. So I had to make adjustments, and I had to learn how to do it. But the single biggest trick in training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the water is to take a breath out before you engage the sequence. So breathe out while your head is above the water, and then go through the sequence and continue to breathe out. The interesting part is that if I'm going through an involved sequence, and my training, I I kind of know when I'm going through a sequence and I made a mistake, I know how my opponent will react to that mistake, and I have to react to his reaction to my mistake. So now my sequence that I initially intended to finish in a fairly short period of time now gets a little more involved, longer. Now you have pressure of being underwater, and you took a, you breathed down before you went under. So you better make sure that you finish that submission or that sweep or whatever you're doing quickly.
So you're creating not only a sequence, but then also a consequence for a mistake within that sequence. Like,
absolutely, I think that requires some level of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I believe it's kind of a high blue belt, purple belt level understanding, where as you're going through your drill and you kind of visualizing and you kind of put your leg not just exactly the way you should have or intended to, you realize that was a mistake, and now I know how my training partner or opponent is going to punish me for it, and now I got to counter him.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me.
I think that's sort of the next level. Yeah.
So when what I've, from reading the book, obviously you've talked a lot about the being in the water helps your joints out. It also helps your fluidity, to use our term.
Yeah.
You're known, among, some pretty high level people. Like Faraz talks about how, rolling with you is just like, just being in this submission soup. And it's, like you're just continuously going for the kill.
Yeah.
And has the water training, or is it more the philosophy and you're just drilling the correct things? Like what brought that? Both. It's all
very simple. Like, to me, I think I had to get to a certain level to sort of start to realize it and start to put things together. But to me, is the best defense is offense. If you're going after somebody, they're not going after you. So, and I've heard that from a lot of people, where I just continually attack and until I either make a mistake or the guy does something right. And it's got, in all honesty, it's got to be a pretty high level guy where he starts going after me. It just, that window, like his, the noose is kind of getting tighter and tighter until he just has no choice but to tap.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both. I mean, the water training and my approach to the game, and I use the word game. I consider Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu an art. I don't like to refer to it as a sport, because I think sport has kind of like people play for the rules. I think if you think of it as an art, it allows a lot of different individualized expressions of how people want this thing to have. And, they can, when they open a school, then their students will perceive it as such, because if they don't, they're going to go somewhere else. So I think it's both. I think it's both the philosophy as well as the training in the water. The training in the water for me is recovery. It's reinforcement of muscle memory. Mm-hmm. And it's also, improves your speed. And here's the funny part. There are some high risk techniques, for example, where you risk, if you screw it up, you head first into the mat. Mm. That's a high risk technique, no matter what, and water is, once you get comfortable with the idea, the water is very forgiving, that it slows your descent down. So you kind of like, oh crap. So if you hit on the bottom of the pool, it's not a good thing. It's happened to me where I strongly recommend you make sure, if you do that, do it with a place where there's a lifeguard or somebody that can fish you out. Because at one point I hit my head so hard on the bottom of the pool, I didn't know which way was up. But it's forgiving to the point where it's like, man, I should have turned my head. So next bunch of sequences is going to be, it's allergies, guys.
Oh no.
This allergy fees up here. So you kind of realize it, and then you try to reinforce that the proper turn of your head and movement through repetition in the water until you kind of feel like, okay, I got this down. I'm not going to make that mistake again.
So something that you brought up there when you were talking about the concept of seeing it as an art, and that your students, even when they come through the door and they're brand new, they're going to sense that. Talk about that in terms of like, I guess the culture that you try and cultivate at Silver Fox BJJ? And how do you think that culture affects the training, both in the development of yourself, but also your students long term?
I think culture or atmosphere is critical. I think, you have to understand that people train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a variety of reasons. And you have to make your school sort of welcoming to people that practice for a variety of reasons. My school has a very strong culture of taking care of others in the tribe, in my tribe. And, I try to apply that philosophy to other people, not just in my tribe, but it's very, very evident. I think to establish a proper atmosphere and culture in a school takes a long time. And you gotta, it's like a tree, you gotta constantly prune it to, so it grows healthy and well. Because if you have a couple of bad apples, and what I mean by that, like bad apple, you have a guy that just likes to prey on the weak. There's like probably nothing worse in like my school perceives probably nothing worse than that, where you have somebody coming from the outside and preys on the weak. We've had that. We generally allow people from outside to come into my school and train. We have a drop-in fee, but I don't recall ever charging it. But we've had bad experiences where you have a guy and he comes in and, he's been training for, it's usually the guys that haven't been training for a long time, but, they just want to, and they don't go for the guys that are equal level or similar build. They usually go for the smaller ones, for the ones they perceive as weak. And, when I see that, or if one of my instructors sees it, it's like we literally stand over them to make sure it does not go to a really bad place. But, usually even, my school stands on 3 legs. It's like literally highly technical, world-class instruction, great atmosphere, and nice, clean facility. And everybody, even the guys, they usually can take care of themselves. I just stand there, like literally, like if I need to, I will grab somebody's belt and like literally, I'm not the strongest or the biggest guy, but I literally will lift somebody off somebody if it goes awry. But you should see what happens after that. One time we had a guy from Florida who was training in a I consider like a garage gym, and I never refer to my school as a gym. My school is an academy. My school is a school. Dojo is okay too. And when he came in, he went after one of my guys who's like, I would consider him middle-aged, very small, but good technical. And he just tried to go super hard, tried to break this guy. And my student at the time, I think he was a purple belt. And this guy was blue belt. And my student kind of got the better of him. And the next thing I know, the guy's walking out with his, dropping F-bombs out of my school without a shirt on and pants dropping down. And it's like, that's not jiu-jitsu.
That's cancerous.
Yeah. And then that would never happen in my school on a that guy would not be my student. It's like very quickly either their inner goodness comes out or they will be squeezed out, because there's no room for that. Because you're not training, you're not trying to get better, you're trying to bully people, you're trying to beat up the weak people. And I can't think of anything else in my school that we would ever take more seriously than people trying to take advantage of the weaker members of the herd that eventually will become the strong members of the herd, and they will, mimic or they will mirror those feelings. I think we're a tribe that tries to take care of each other, on and off the mats. And, I think there's a lot more to jiu-jitsu than just the technical aspects. And I try to do, take care of that as well.
Yeah. And, something that you said there, thinking at it from, the old rollers perspective, I have some friends who are kind of on the fence about trying jiu-jitsu, and, maybe they're middle-aged, maybe a little older. And, they feel that they may get worked or beaten up or something. And I always try to tell them, if you find a place that has a culture of, like building you up versus beating you up, you're gonna turn into a tough guy, but or girl, I should say, a tough person. It may take a little while, but as long as that culture is in place where you're given the time, then, you're going to have that positive outcome. It's just,
we
you have to,
until that happens. Yeah.
right. And then you will be the person protecting the next person coming through the door. So you get to carry on that tradition if the culture is there.
The interesting part is, like, if you walk into a school that's a meathead factory versus a school that has a good atmosphere, you do not have to train martial arts before. You literally can smell it. You can taste it. You know this is a good place. You just know it right off the bat. As soon as you walk in, it's like within 5 minutes, And if if anybody that's listening to this that walks into the martial arts school and has that queasy feeling like I'm not in the right place, walk out and find the right place. There are right places for you.
And especially with the proliferation of the art, in most cities there's multiple places you can go, and even in small towns there's at least one or two. Within an hour's drive, and you said you were having to commute into the city to train initially with that hour drive. That's,
or South Jersey, or like Enzo's, is Central Jersey. That's an hour drive. Not in the summer when people go down the shore. It's more than an hour drive each way.
Right.
And people like, well, I'm thinking about switching school. I'm moving and I'm going to be 20 minutes away. Shit, man. If something is important, you make time for it.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Especially, like once again, thinking of it from the old rollers perspective, we may not have the advantage of youth, maybe speed, maybe recovery ability, but by the time you've reached a certain age, you've reached a level of maturity and understanding that if you're going to do something, you're not half-assing it. Like at 18, maybe you show up and you show up, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be good, you got a whole ass, like.
Yeah, that's one of my I say full assing. You got a full ass.
You got a full ass, exactly. And that's definitely kind of a perspective where it's like, well, there might be this place that's 15 minutes away, but it's just like you use your language, a meathead factory, and you can tell it's going to be hard to be able to be consistent there because you're going to be getting wrecked all the time.
Yeah, and it's not going to be a good environment. And like literally, when you feel like you're walking into a place like that, walk out, find a good place, because there are a lot of good places around the U.S. Around the world, most countries now you have choices, and I'd rather drive to a good place for an hour than have a crappy place across the street from me. Well,
it's fascinating that you say that, because I've interviewed quite a few people from the earliest days of jiu-jitsu in America. In the early culture, there were a lot of like challenge matches and people running through the door, and it was a lot closer to a combative environment, than I think places like yourself, are trying to create. Talk a little bit about that, how you made it through that environment, and what you've experienced and seen as the evolution of our culture, so to speak.
It's true. I don't know how I made it. I don't. There must be something wrong with me, but it's true, but back in the day, it was people were not as educated about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they didn't believe, and they would come in and they wanted to try, but their try was like, it's a fight. And even when I opened my school 14 years ago, up until about 7 years ago, we still, every once in a while, I get that. And I'm stupid enough to just, okay, yeah, you want to try? Like, I don't know if you could see that. My ears just go back, and I was like, all right, let's try.
You're going to get the fox.
Yeah. You're not going to like it. But, you know, I've had a guy that literally, you know, I wound up on the bottom, and he literally, this is back when I was still a blue belt, which is a long, long time ago. It was more than 20 years ago. Probably, this has got to be back in 94, 95, time frame, 96 maybe. But, you know, he tried to literally soccer kick my head. He literally tried to soccer kick my head. When I arm locked him, he was screaming.
Yeah, if
You know?
we're coming to soccer kicks, then you're gonna get a little bit more of a firm treatment.
Yeah. And then as soon as I let go, he just like he's running off the mats and puking on the way. I had you know, this is probably the first year or second year I opened my school, and I had a guy come in, and the kid he was overweight, but he was, you know, like guys that are, you know, overweight, but you know, he was, I would say 25. His uncle taught him Jeet Kune Do grappling concepts. He wrestled in high school, and he was probably 260, 270, but he moved like a cat. He was a big kid. So I'm teaching class, and my knee was tweaked. I couldn't really move that well. I could not walk that well, but, you know, he wants to try. So I put him with the guy was a purple belt at the time. You know, he was good. He was athletic, and but he was 245. I put him with him, and I think my guy was just kind of scared. He just closed the guard, and nothing happened. And I put him with one of my, at the time, good brown belts. So the guy was about 210. And I just remember, I still remember, like it was. So my guy is passing this guy's guard, and he just grabs him and just like launches him. So and my dipshit friends like, Fox, he's not convinced, you're gonna have to go with him. I said, oh, okay. You maybe bleep that out. I said, okay, I got to do it. You know, the buck stops with me.
He's got to get to Fox.
So I said, you know, when I go with a guy like that, I know it's going to be hard for me to take him down. So what I usually do, I push. They push back, I arm locked him. But this, I was hurt, and I took no chances. So as I'm arm locking him, he's screaming. He didn't tap, but he was screaming. So as soon as I arm locked him, I was like, dude, you got to tap a little quicker, man. So usually when I do that, I do it 3 times. It's like 3 times. First time, okay, maybe it was lucky. Second time is like, oh, you know, and third time there's no doubt. So of course the guy signs up, and you know, I don't see him again. So I called the guy about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. I said, I you know, for a little bit, I thought maybe I broke his arm. So I called him. I said, hey, what happened? Are you okay? Is everything good? He's like, no, everything's good. He was a little sickly. You know, don't worry. I'll be back next week. Good. 2-3 weeks go by. Nothing. So I was like, man, I called him up again, and again, oh yeah, I was really busy. I'll be back next week. The guy never showed up again. But you know, like a guy like that is not interested in learning. He's not really interested in trying, and he's interested to see what he can do. So if you want to have a fight, we're gonna have a fight. And I've got to, like, after a few years, I kind of got to that point where, like, you know who they are as soon as they walk in the door. So if you want to have a fight, let's have a fight. You know. But that it's changed in the last, you know, every once in a while you get somebody that just kind of like goes a little, you know, like wants to really, I want to see what I can do. Okay, let's go. But it's become much more rare, because I think people now kind of understand. They become much better educated about, you know, what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is and what he can do.
Yeah. And I also think the proliferation of YouTube channels like yours and some others, when people start looking online, they start to see, even as a layman, you know, and I use the word layman kind of loosely, just someone with no experience, you can see, you know, quality of technique, and you can say, oh, that would be tough for me to do, like, you know, to convince my body to do without some training. So you can know, okay, there's a skill there, and if you're not going to walk through the door and be like, okay, I'm here to whoop everybody. You're going to be like, hey,
Yeah,
there's
let's see what I can do.
there's some skills here worth learning, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely true.
that I do think that the internet, for all of its, we'll say
Shortcomings.
negativity, yeah,
Yeah, true.
it has improved, I think, the level of understanding when someone walks through the door. There's less of a required education from day one about like what is jiu-jitsu. Most people, as they step through the door, probably already know that, and they're coming to now learn and experience it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Well, I tell you what, Fox, I've gotten a lot from you. One question I have is from a strength and conditioning standpoint. You're not a huge guy, and I don't see you muscling a whole lot of people.
I resemble that remark.
Well, I'm bigger than I want to be. I got a little bit of a doughy midsection here, so I'm gonna not let the camera go down. But from a strength and conditioning standpoint, what has your protocol look like? Just really don't have one. Is that the
only strength and conditioning is training? I think if, to be honest with you, if I strength and condition, I'd have to cut back on my jiu-jitsu. If I was 25 and had some artificial help, I could do strength and conditioning. So I don't have artificial help, and I'm not willing to give up jiu-jitsu, because I think if I gave up jiu-jitsu, my strength would be probably higher, but my jiu-jitsu would be lower. So you got to prioritize. I think if you're a 25-year-old athlete, I think it's probably you should work that into your regimen. If you're a guy in your 40s and you could train 3 days a week and can strength and condition 2 days a week, you should be training 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be more beat up. Your body's going to be more beat up, but it's going to get used to it. The other thing that's going to happen is when you are strong, you will try to impose power strength. Jiu-jitsu is not power strength, it's technique.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you feel strong, or a lot of guys do this. I think this is a training regimen for a lot of middle-aged guys, where they train 3 times a week because they go balls to the wall. The next day they can barely walk, so they need to take a day or 2 off, and then they feel better and they do the same thing. You know what? If you banged up, you will try to play a more technical game, because you're going to have to do it again tomorrow. And I think giving your body a rest is a good philosophy, but also people take it to extreme where, like, okay, I've recovered from the training 3 days ago, I'm going back to balls in the wall. And that's not, you're not learning the best jiu-jitsu, because you're not trying to be technical. You're trying to use power and intensity in lieu of technique. And so long story short, I have no strength and conditioning regimen.
Well, we don't ascribe to anything, here at the Old Rollers podcast, like one way or the other. We want to know from experts, what do they do, and then how can we incorporate those philosophies into our own training.
Yeah. I mean, make
one
your
other
own
thing
opinion.
that
That's my philosophy.
I think is, go ahead.
No,
So,
it's only my philosophy.
kind of
that's
moving.
Sorry.
Does it sound like I was talking over you?
No, it's
it
okay.
might be
I
my
just say
internet.
This is my philosophy, and people could subscribe to it, or they have a different one. That's okay too. I just explained to what my thinking is, and if you like my thinking, you want to follow it, that's great. If you don't, then that's okay too. That's why we call it an art.
Right. Yeah. You can express it your way. So one thing that you've done and you've made in your teaching, a lot of your teaching videos and the book and whatnot, one of your kind of very high percentage weapons is the guillotine. But yes, you talk about you have some wrist problems, and some of the grips that a lot of people use and that feel are superior, you're not able to use because it would give you wrist trouble. And some of the old rollers, we might have like a knee that doesn't work as well as we would like, or an ankle, or in this case a wrist. But you're adjusting, you're working around it and finding effectiveness. And so kind of talk about that, for someone, who maybe their body isn't always agreeing with them. Like what ways do you use to work around those little, tweaks or things like that?
Adapt and evolve. It's very simple. I think I look a lot of examples that you could find. There's guys like Brian Freeman, they're adaptive athletes. Max Ulloa, he's also an adaptive athlete. Pete, I forget his last name, also an adaptive athlete. I mean, here's guys that put most people's issues to like nothing. Most people's issues are nothing compared to what these guys face, yet they're become very effective in their training of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and how they approach the art. So, they've ultimately made the very, very big adaptation that's very effective. And I think people could take an example and learn from them to adapt their games. I think there's some old joke like, "Hey doctor, my elbow hurts when I do this." Well, stop doing that and your elbow won't hurt. So if you have pain, like, pain is a very simple way of telling you doing something, you're doing damage to your body. And if you have pain, stop doing that. Do something else. Change it. If it's a pain that's short term, okay, you may have to rest that joint for whatever. Like back in the old days, we used to just, if guy had his elbow hurt, but he could train, he just like literally tuck his hand into his belt and train. Mm-hmm. Or take time off. But if it's something that's permanent or long term, then you have to find a way around it. And one of the beautiful things about, not a beautiful thing, but it's one of the good things about injuries, a lot of times they happen on the dominant side of your body. That's that side of the body that you tend to use the most. And they force you to develop the other side of the body or other parts of your body. So, you can appreciate some of those things that even if you're injured, if you're able to train, you can sort of start to work on some things that may not be part of your game, but, become an important part of your game. I have a pretty broad game. I have a lot of submissions, go-to submissions, guillotine, anacondas being one of them, inverted triangles, reverse triangles being another one. Arm locks a huge part of my game. Knee bars a big part of my game. So I have a lot of things to go to, but that also takes time to develop. So I'd encourage, if you guys have pains, is to start to think about ways to do something differently. And if you have a good coach, a lot of jiu-jitsu is very logical. You can figure things out on your own. It might take you a lot longer, but if you have a good coach, good teacher, they can usually give you the answer a lot quicker. And if your guy doesn't know the answer, reach out to somebody online. And, like I said, if somebody approaches me, and, especially like when I'm doing like this daily thing, basically it's interactive. We literally have questions on specific moves and then I try to address all of them. So, reach out to other guys too. And, one of the things about this thing is, I call it antiviral edition. We just had our 40th episode today, I think.
And I've watched every single one of them. So
nice, 40 out of 40.
I didn't get to watch them all during the time, but I've watched a majority of them during the time. And you've answered a couple of my questions, so I'm very thankful for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I truly enjoy it. I love doing it. I'd rather teach my classes in person, but in the absence of that, I enjoy this and I try to answer all the questions. We were doing it for 9 months. I started this, about 11 months ago. It was a monthly thing because, I was in Holland driving from a seminar in Germany, and I was talking to a guy in India who was asking me technical questions. And I was like, man, I got to figure out a better way to do this, because the call kept getting dropped. And that was the inspiration for Roll with the Fox, which I was doing on a monthly basis, every first Friday of every month, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. And when this thing hit, when my school closed, then I said, all right, unless I break, I'm going to do it on a daily basis. So same time, same place, same training partner, same cameraman. This is my circle of contact.
Yep. it's been a fun thing to watch, and I've gotten a lot from it, and I think obviously a whole lot of other people have too. And I actually think that kind of goes back to the fluid BJJ philosophy, sort of holistically, which is don't argue with what you don't have, accept what you do have, and get to work, with it. So
Yeah.
just like your wrist doesn't like, high elbow guillotines. Well, don't keep doing high elbow guillotines. Figure out a way to make an effective one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that makes it what makes it an art, as opposed to, well, even in some sports, people with limitations or they have to make adaptations. So it does work even in sport. But anyways.
Well, Fox, if someone wants to learn more about you, how could they? What means on, let's say, the interwebs could they use to find out about you?
You could start with our website, which is silverfoxbjj.com. So it's very easy to remember, silverfoxbjj.com. You can go on fluidbjj.com. But anything, I think, if you go to silverfoxbjj.com, I think there's links to videos I've done with Firas Zahabi. I think there's links to it's easy. Like all the episodes, all the instructionals either are on Firas Zahabi's TriStar Gym channel, or they're on our channel, which is Silver Fox BJ. If you just go YouTube and put Silver Fox BJJ, you'll find me.
Yeah,
so it's very easy. Silver Fox BJJ, and you can't miss us.
And I also wanted to thank you for those.
Here we go.
Yes, look at that shirt, gorgeous.
You can't miss it.
And those videos on YouTube with Firas, I got a ton out of those. I mean, you do some serious deep dives, especially the triangle one, really, because I got very, very short legs, and like embarrassingly short. But you kind of talk about, like, well, a guy with longer legs will be able to do it this way. A guy with shorter legs will have to make this adjustment, and it really did help me to have some confidence and start throwing triangles. I usually do triangles from pinning position so that I don't get smashed when they get out. But you kind of gave me the confidence to start slinging them from the guard a little bit more, and willing to eat it if I get my guard passed.
That's called training. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, Fox, thank you so much for your time, and we'll put some links to Silver Fox BJJ and then also the Fluid BJJ book in the show notes. I think you've passed on a lot of very valuable information for myself and my fellow old rollers, and can't thank you enough for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out again.
Oh, I'll bug you all over the roll with the Foxes. Like, I'll just be spamming you to death.
I'm looking forward to it.
Great. All right. Pause for a second here.